Hello, and welcome to today's webcast, Veritas NetBackup Admin Best Practices, How to Avoid Pain and Gain Efficiencies, brought to you by DataLink. Before we begin, I wanted to cover a few housekeeping items. This webcast is designed to be interactive between you and the presenter. The webcast console you are looking at can be completely customized, and you can resize or move any of the windows that you have open. If you have any questions during the webcast, you can click on the Q&A widget at the bottom and submit your question. All questions from this webcast will be captured. If you are experiencing any technical difficulties, please visit the webcast help guide by clicking on the question mark icon below the presentation window. This help guide covers common technical issues. I would now like to turn over this presentation to our presenter, Nick Bennett. Nick, the floor is yours.
Great, thanks a lot. So this month's Tech Tuesday is going to be, we're going to be talking about some NetBackup lessons learned, how to avoid pain, common pitfalls and things that are missed. So to go over some of the topics that we're going to be discussing here. We'll start with versioning, best practices for upgrades, installs, making sure you're prepared for upcoming changes to your environment, and upgrade compatibility. We'll be taking like a 40,000-foot view and taking a look at environment design, planning, making all these things work together. We'll be talking about some best practices. We'll be talking about a good DR plan. We'll be talking about catalog backups, when to run manual catalog backups, and configuring MSDP catalog backups. This is commonly missed. And as far as performance, what's realistic, what to expect, how to read and tune NetBackup performance, SLP backlogs, buffers, what do your weights mean, what do some of those things mean, and how can you tune to optimize those, understanding the servers, whether it be a master media server, how much RAM do you need, are you running out of RAM and using disk swap. We'll be talking about error, and in closing there's some additional reference links, and then we'll be doing Q&A. So for upgrades and installation, the first thing to consider is the order to upgrade. So you always want to upgrade in this order. You want to upgrade your Op Center server, your master server, followed by media servers and clients. You don't need to do everything at the same time. In general, you want to be no more than 2 revs back from the highest rev that's installed. And also, always check the master compatibility list to make sure you're within support. It's recommended, though, of course, to be on the same version as your media servers and clients. This becomes more important if it's a high availability client or SQL Exchange, things like this. And sometimes, you run into issues where it's not possible. You're running an old version of a proprietary software or whatever the case may be, and you can't upgrade that client. For the most part, the client is going to be the lowest running version, and in most cases, that's okay. A quick note, as of February 1st of this year, NetBackup dropped support for every version other than 7.x and up. So as far as considerations for upgrades and planning, if you're running 7.6 or lower, it is, it's a good idea to get that going as soon as possible. So being ready for change. Do you have old storage arrays, maybe a couple of DXI and a data domain out there, and you want to consolidate, things like this? Before you make any changes like that, of course, you run a catalog backup. The main thing that you'll run into, if you run into problems during your upgrade, your fallback is going to be your catalog to bring you back to the environment that you started with prior to any of your upgrades or changes. So always run a catalog backup prior to pulling the trigger on any major or even minor upgrades in your environment. You want to store your catalog backup on basic disk or tape. The reason for that is once you get into a DR situation, you'll have to configure the basic disk or tape where the catalog backup is sitting, and it's just extra steps and extra points of failure if you're doing MSDP reconfiguration to pull that recovery. So best practice there is always to do tape or basic disk. They're fairly simple to configure in a new environment. Make sure your retention is going to cover your worst case scenario. So if you've got something going on and you've only got a week's worth of catalog backups, it's possible that you wouldn't recover to the point of failure. So if I'll always keep 2 or 3 maybe bowls of catalog backups. Some people I've seen will keep up to 6 months. I think that's a bit of overkill. If you think about it, a 6-month-old catalog recovery, you're going to be losing 6 months of your backups if you do that. So maybe 2 or 3 weeks. Make sure you have redundant copies of the fulls just in case one of your fulls is bad. But beyond that, it's probably 3 weeks is about as good as you need. You want to make sure that you have a handle on your DR file. You don't want to save your DR file wherever you're running your catalog backups are on the machine, like on the master. If the master fails, you might not have access to that DR file. So or if you do that, just make sure you have another copy. It's common to have that emailed and also a local copy. So let's go. So taking a 40,000-foot view, it's been said that NetBackup is actually a world-class product for network analysis. And when you're running backups, you're going to run into multiple statuses that can relate to a network issue, intermittent problems showing up with, failed backups for you. NetBackup depends on a good infrastructure. Switches, cables, DNS servers, etc., all provide the foundation for NetBackup. So proper sizing, configuration of these components will make NetBackup run optimally. NetBackup will only be as stable and robust as the hardware runs on. So it's going to, NetBackup by default is going to just go all out and take all the resources it can to get its job done as quickly as possible. So if you're limiting NetBackup with slower disks or a slower network or limited RAM, you're going to see that in latency. So from above, you want to make sure that you're consistent end-to-end on your network, that you have adequate performance hardware on your media servers and master server to accommodate your backups and anything else those servers, the client servers, might need to be doing in addition to your backups. So just some broad considerations. So in planning, you want to plan for expansion and growth, to avoid having to add disks, for instance, when you're running short on space and it's a last-minute thing, and it's can lead to multiple issues, without some pre-planning there. So you always want to have that in the back of your mind. You're going to be running backups, and your catalog is going to grow. The best plan is to just never have to use catalog compression. It slows down NetBackup, particularly when you need it most. So during your restores, all of those compressed images are going to be uncompressed, so there's a little bit of latency and delay there. And if you've compressed your catalog because of a lack of disk space, you're going to run out of disk space, of course, because those are going to be decompressed as you view them in the backup archive and restore GUI, for instance. So if you were to select images for the last 5 years, for instance, and you're archiving, if you're compressing everything 2 weeks or older, that's going to be a lot of decompression there on that disk. So even if you do use catalog compression, just make sure that if it were uncompressed, you would still have adequate space on that disk, and then you won't run into that issue, but it will also accommodate your new backup. So common practice for that might be to archive anything that's sitting on tape for like a legal hold of 7 to 10 years, because those are one-off restores anyway. So we got to make it all work together. NetBackup does have significant system requirements. it will function and it will do its job to the best of its ability, but you're going under less resources than optimal. But you're going to see jobs running slow, stalling out. You're going to run into issues like status 196s when your window closes or whatever particular backup. Disk pools can report offline, so you can get 2074s and such where you're gonna have disks marked offline. You can run NetBackup on virtual servers. Virtual master's fine. Just don't back it up as a VM. You want to, just as a general practice, you really don't want to back up your master server at all. You just rely on your catalog for recovery of your master server. That's going to have the NetBackup EMM database. It's going to have everything you need to get back working. So the OS and the system software itself, those are pretty simple, but the just rebuilding, it's all relying on the catalog. Same thing with the media server. You can do a virtual media server. Just don't back it up as a VM. And tape libraries won't work with VM. So that needs to be a consideration if you have tape integration for duplications or disk staging or anything like that. You'll have to have a physical media server for that. Virtualized media servers are I/O intensive, so you want to consider the disks they're sitting on. You don't want to use SATA disks. So those disks are just too slow for it in general. I've also seen that on a couple of cases with master servers. Master server's got its own database, and there was some disk latency issues because it was sitting on a SATA disk. So that's also something to consider. So in pre-planning for master and media servers, the master server RAM is going to vary just based on the number of jobs, but in general, maybe 16 gig these days. There are some metrics out there too in the documentation at the end of this, so I'll point that out. Media servers definitely need more RAM in general. With MSDP, you're going to start with a 4 gig base memory and a gig per terabyte of MSDP. So another practice, a best practice for media servers is choose a host name and leave it. So you don't want to be changing your host names. IP changes are fine because that's under the hood. We just want to be able to resolve the name. So best practices. BP-MList output is a good reference point, especially if you have tapes that are expiring and you don't use Vault. You might not have this report information, and it's going to be a good reference if, a couple of years down the line, you just didn't think about it. You have tapes off-site, for instance, and you need to reference a job that was backed up or something like that. This isn't going to be an end-all, be-all, but it's just an extra little bit of information that can be helpful if you had to try to find some images that were maybe lost or unexpectedly expired. And also, Op Center is a free program, including NetBackup. The analytics piece is an extra license, but you can use just the base Op Center to get daily reports about your environment, have a good overview of what's going on. So that's a good thing just to utilize that as a tool to keep an eye on your environment so you don't have to dig around the admin log, and try and search out things like that as opposed to just a broad report. In general, your fulls and incrementals should never have the same retention, and not even in general, but if your full expires, the incrementals done since then are going to be useless. So it's important to pay attention to your schedules and any schedule overrides. If you're using SLPs, for instance, you want to make sure that your retentions make sense. So you want that full to be to be able to be restored from with any incrementals after it. So your retention should be at least maybe a day after the last incremental. So when you're using Accelerator or synthetic backups, you want to make sure your full retention is longer than its job frequency. The reason for that is there's a track log there. And so what will happen is if you're consistently doing if your full retention is dropping off a day or so before the next full runs, you'll be looking at a full reseed of that Accelerator backup as opposed to the functionality of Accelerator, which makes it work better, or just sending changed bits. It might rescan everything, but the actual storage is you won't have to pull all of that data back over. So you want to pay attention again to the full there. make sure that your full retention, there's your expire date isn't more than your job frequency there. It's important to understand scheduling. You want to understand frequency versus calendar. You want to know how these jobs fit into the schedule if you raise priority. So what he's talking about there is, if a job fails, that's going to get a higher priority. There's some functions in NetBackup that you can use to reprioritize jobs. A lot of that might be redundant, but it's important, to consider that if you have, like for instance, Exchange backups or something like that are more important, to make sure that they're working, you can give them a higher priority, and maybe use frequency and calendar together, depending on if you have quarterly backups or something like that. You might do that in calendar and frequency dailies and weekly folds. So just having a good understanding of that and integrating in the environment is a good idea. So there's some secrets of NBU admins. The NetBackup administrator doing his job well or her job well is going to be looked at as probably the lazy guy there, or gal. And that's probably a good thing, because that means you're comfortable with your environment, you are aware of these things. So your, the heat comes on you, of course, when everything fails and you need to restore everything, which isn't any big deal if you have these things in place. So you have your catalog backups run, and you're aware of how to do the restore. You're familiar with this. You've done a dry one run maybe in a lab or a DR. You probably want to do that more often than a yearly DR. You'll want to, especially if you make any bigger changes in the environment, if you add, say, a library or you add a new disk pool type or something like that from a different vendor, you'll want to make sure to practice as if that thing fell on its face and you have to restore everything. And then you're going to be confident in your solution to restore everything, hopefully. So these are some tips to help with that and to keep track of everything. As far as one of the things to consider too is not passing off a status 1, for instance, and letting it rerun. I think being diligent about making sure that all of the jobs are running on schedule and completing as expected with status 0 is important. The better that is, the more or the less you'll have to deal with in a DR situation. If you won't have to question whether or not this client was backed up on this day or not, because you're confident that it did. Otherwise, it would be addressed specifically on that day. So it's critical to have a good DR plan. So a good DR plan will help you focus and make sure you don't miss anything when stress levels are high. This is why dry runs are a good idea. You're confident in your processes and your environment and what needs to happen and what's the most important based on your priorities. So it just depends. It depends on the environment and what's most important to get back online. It might be a database server, might be email, might be whatever. So depending on your environment, it's important, and it's in fact critical just to have that in your DR plan. What order of operations are we going to do things? How are we going to bring everything back up, and in what order? Yeah, and knowing where your DR file, what it is, how to reference it, how to make any changes in there if needed. Most of the time, you won't make any changes to your DR file, but an edit that's common would be like a disk ID or a media ID. If you have a different tape, say from a non-primary copy of a tape, you might need to change that. So it's referencing the right information in your staged environment. Okay, so protecting the servers, the NetBackup servers. You don't want to back up your master server. You can consider your master server backed up by performing a catalog backup. So, if anytime something is gone amiss on the master, if it goes so wrong that you need to restore or rebuild your master, just rely on a catalog backup. You can always reinstall the OS and install whatever version of NetBackup that you're running, which is a note too. If you are having to reinstall NetBackup and you think that's, since you're rebuilding your server anyway, you might as well upgrade to the latest version of NetBackup because you're planning on it next month, and this is a good opportunity because you already got downtime. Don't do that. You have to run the same version of NetBackup on there that your catalog backup was run. So just a side note, I guess, on that. And how often should you run it? How often should you run your catalog backup? I had touched on this earlier. So, you know, 2 to 3 copies, 2 to 3 fulls should be sufficient, depending on your environment. I think that if you have different data retentions, that's fine. But like a 3-week-old catalog backup means anything that happened since 3 weeks ago is effectively gone. So, you know, if you're looking at a real old catalog, that might be good for reference only, you know, so you really probably wouldn't bring that back into production. But if you have the space or the tapes, go ahead. It's always good to have that reference if you can. When should you run it? So you're always going to run a catalog backup before you make any changes, patches, upgrades that could crash your master, crash any of the servers. So you have the latest and greatest to recover from should you need it. And one of the commonly missed backups is your MSDP catalog. So we'll talk about that in the next few slides here. So there is, on an appliance, there's a script that you can run on the appliance that will automatically create a catalog backup schedule and policy and schedule on the master in your environment. And what will happen is it will be just a blank policy. You can go in there and set your schedules. It will automatically have the backup selections that are needed to recover from a MSDP server that drops off the map and you need to recover it. So same difference with a non-appliance MSDP catalog. So you can create a DR policy using this DR control command, and that will, there's a few options with that. You can actually set some of these after. You can just run the DR control and name it, and then it will populate in your policies. You can go in and make changes as needed as far as the schedules and gosh, I think that's it. I can't remember for sure now. But anyway, the main thing there is going to be the backup selections. There won't be any question about what is being backed up that would be needed should everything fail. So that's the most important piece there. Yeah, so this is a little bit more detailed information about adding this to your include list for media server backups. Right, so this is the edits to the policy that gets created. So it's up to you. I mean, you can create the policy and make these edits here in the admin console, or in the DR control command when you generate it. So you want to save your DR file to a safe location. Email's great, and if email's not available, use a secondary location, and even a third in that case. You probably want your primary DR file to be saved somewhere and maybe duplicate that or something, just so it's in 2 different places. You won't have a single point of failure. You want to write your catalog backups to basic disk or tape, and this is a rehash, I guess, a little bit, but it's pretty important because there's a lot of extra things that can happen if you're reconfiguring an MSDP from a total failure in a disaster recovery situation that can just add it can just add another layer of difficulty and maybe even failure to configure it properly, or you can't reference the backup image. With basic disk or tape, it's fairly straightforward. You just add it into the new environment and read it. So, you want to monitor your catalog space closely. A general rule of thumb is to keep at least 25% free space for the catalog. That's going to give you adequate amount of time if you do add, like, say, a bunch of new VMs and they're starting to eat up your catalog space. You'll have 25% free, so hopefully you'll get a little bit of lead time to be able to add some disk or take a look at some new options for, where to move the catalog if needed. Just to reiterate too, when you're using catalog compression, or if you do use catalog compression, you always want to maintain enough space on that drive for decompression should you need it. So the advantage of that catalog compression in this case is your backup time. So you're going to be backing up less data for your catalog backups, which is nice because if you're backing up the full-size image catalog and most of those images are 7 to 10 year retention, it just adds a little bit of resource time that you could save here. But you always want to make sure that you have the space available should you need to do the recoveries. So, and if you do have a catalog backup failure, it might be on your mind that this is a daily and no big a deal. I'll get it tomorrow. This happens a couple times a month, whatever might pop up in your mind, but those are the days that Murphy's Law kicks in and he wants to crash your master server. So it's important just to be diligent, especially about the priority items, and a high priority item in NetBackup, of course, is your catalog backup. So you want to make sure that you scrutinize those and make sure that they're running as expected. You're getting status zeros there. Okay, so we'll take a look at performance. So out of the box, NetBackup's going to use everything it can. It wants to back up your backup selection as quickly as possible. So it's going to utilize, the maximum disk, RAM, and network to get this backup job completed quickly. So it uses everything that it can. So there's some tuning options as far as buffers, your stream counts, your I/O streams, for disk pools, NIC bonding. Data pathing is an important one that has, is easy to overlook. So you don't want to use a single HBA, for instance, to read your VM backups and write to tapes. You want to use two separate ports for that. Okay. Another common problem that can pop up is SLP backlog. So in planning and or tuning, after you've already got an environment in place, is to pay attention to your replication. So your replication or your duplication operations from your SLPs. So if you're looking at say 100 of some operation of duplications, and your time frame is 4 hours, and over the last couple of weeks it bounces up to 5 hours, that's the time to start investigating and making sure that there isn't some issue end to end there, whether it be disk reading the images, the network in between, or writing the images on the target. These backlogs can just grow and grow and grow, and so the nature of the SLPs will be that will continually grow. They're not going to just drop off. So it's important to address that as soon as you see any kind of issue. There's a little bit more information on some of these in the next slides. So some of these empty or full buffer messages in your job details. For instance, if BPTM is reporting buffers or reporting waiting for fulls, each of those delays is 10 milliseconds. And they can add up If you're seeing in the thousands, it's probably nothing to be too concerned about. But in the hundreds of thousands and up, you're starting to get into more major delays where you want to consider changing some of the touch files that are available in NetBackup for the size of the buffers and the number of buffers that you're using. Although there's a caveat to that we'll see in the next slide, or the one after, I think. Empty buffers. So if you have VVCAR waiting for empty buffers, it had data to send, but the buffers were full. So you can tune all the delay out, but this is something that you're going to want to do. You'll want to get as close is good enough here. So if you're having, since you're talking about 10 or 15 millisecond delays, like I say, if you're under 1,000, you're doing great. Oh, and when each job runs, it will tell you what the buffers are set to and how many you're using. So here's a little snip of what's happening and which processes are doing what. There's a parent BPTM process running on your media server and a child BPTM process that's running on the media server as well. That's writing out to storage. Your client data is going to be your VPVCAR process. So as far as correlating those buffer messages in job details, this is a simplified picture of what's going to be happening. It's going to be filling up that buffer space. I look at it as filling up a bucket with water. So buffers reside in RAM, and so it's important to have those values appropriate for your server. It might sound good to have a meg buffer, but if you have, for instance, here's a quick metric with 32 jobs using a 512 meg buffer, or 512K buffer, excuse me. So it's going to be using 16 gigs of RAM, so it can ramp up very quickly. It's important just to right-size that for your environment, and this takes some doing. So it's good to have a starting point, start with the defaults, see where your delays are, and adjust up or down from there. Changing the size data buffers changes the block size written to tape and can cause media issues such as restore failures and media being frozen. So best practice here is if you're going to, you'll want to consider your size data buffers before your first backup to a tape storage unit. And you'll want to do some test runs, see how it's looking, make some adjustments as needed, and then set it. And Ron Popeil says, set it and forget it. Or he might have, I don't even know if he still says that. But anyway, as far as the disk goes, though, it's less of a problem. So you can actually, there's another touch file, you can use a size data buffers disk, and you can make that change after backup's already run to it. That's not to say you can't do restores. If you do change this value for tape, it just is a bit of a headache and maybe unexpected. So it's best just to leave it. So you want to be, you want to consider your maximum block size. And that touch file should be on all media servers that are going to be utilizing whatever storage unit you're going to. So Enabling multi-streaming increases the CPU memory and disk usage on the client since it's sending multiple streams of data at the same time. So that's another thing to consider is your clients. If you have older clients that you're backing up with the lower rev NetBackup or something like that, and you want to ramp it up, it's important to consider what the client's capable of doing as well. Enabling multiplexing means sending multiple jobs to one tape drive. So you'll have multiple streams of data going to one tape drive, which is nice until you go to restore it. So that's where you want to consider that stream count. Your restore time, if you have a restore time that, you know, you have to get certain servers up in a certain amount of time. The higher that stream count is, the slower that restore is going to be. So it's important to consider that before you pull the trigger and set it. So multiplexing versus multi-streaming are together. Multiplexing, again, combines the streams into a single stream to tape. This only works for tape. A consideration for this and implementing this, even if you don't think you need it, as far as for performance increase or anything like that, is to go ahead and use it anyway. Because if you're seeing delays, for instance, in a client sending data to the media server, the tape drive is going to be waiting, but it doesn't actually wait because tape drives are, they don't idle. So you want to find the happy medium that keeps that drive cooking along at a steady pace, and enabling multiplexing can help do that. So multi-streaming sends multiple streams of data from the client at the same time. So that works for disk or storage units. And again, just to consider what the capabilities of the client are before you set that too high. And so AIR as a DR solution. AIR is traditional NetBackup is one master, media servers, and clients, and you know, altogether is a NetBackup domain. During DR, the master is rebuilt, then restores are started. AIR simplifies this. So AIR, there are two NetBackup domains. Backups run in production and get replicated to your DR NetBackup domain. So it's a separate NetBackup domain altogether. The catalog information is replicated as well. And so in case of a DR, you can just actually start restoring right from the AIR target, your replication target NetBackup domain. And as an aside, in a case where you might have lost some data in your production, you can also restore to production clients from those DR images with a few changes. So in closing, here are some reference links. Another point that I like to point out to people who are unfamiliar is the SORT site. So this is a great tool. It's going to give you, the main thing that I do with this for customers is I'll go out there and do an upgrade checklist. You know, hey Nick, we're going to be installing this, or we're going to be upgrading to this, and we have this OS. What do we do? Or what's compatible? What's supported? A lot of those questions are answered right there. So you can go to the sort.veritas.com. In this case, we're talking NetBackup. So we definitely do NetBackup. It's real simple. You add your environment information particulars, be it OS, current version, and what version you're going to be upgrading to, and you get a very detailed list on what to consider if you need to do a step upgrade from where you're at. There's some third-party links here and our support sites, how to get in touch with us, and some other useful links, your release information, and again, just to reference back to the compatibility lists, you'll want to look at the master compatibility list. It will talk to you. It will list everything, from VMware, OSs, software, be it databases, email. So it's important to consider that information if you're making changes. And should be it. So appreciate your time.
Thanks, Nick. Thank you, everyone, for attending today's webcast. As a reminder, all questions will be captured and will be responded to directly if we haven't answered during the course of the webcast. An on-demand version will also be available within 2 to 3 days, and you will receive an email notification once the recording is available. Thank you again for participating in today's webcast.